Tonight, China strikes back, and the tit for tat has markets reeling as trade talks between China and the U.S. come to a screeching halt.
This as the Secretary of State skips a trip to Russia for a meeting over dangerous tensions rising in Iran.
And the abortion debate heats up.
We are not going to continue to be bullied as pro-lifers.
We take a look at cases moving through the states after a major rally this weekend.
Plus,
wow, this is a frontal assault on religious liberty.
the Equality Act, how it's not so equal.
And the vice president,
Go from here and live it out.
with a call to action to the next generation.
All this and more tonight on Faith Nation.
Tariffs on China and a major blow to the U.S. stock market. Welcome to Faith Nation. I'm Jenna Browder.
And I'm Eric Phillips in for John Jessup. Now, Wall Street saw massive losses today.
Yeah, stocks slid down more than 470 points at the opening bell, and throughout the day did not improve at closing. The Dow Jones Industrial Average was down about 616 points. The Nasdaq down 269, and the S&P ended the day down 69 points.
And the U.S. markets are not the only ones who saw big losses today. Markets around the globe dropped as the trade war between the U.S. and China leaves the financial sector uncertain at best.
For more now, we turn to the White House and CBN White House correspondent Ben Kennedy. Ben?
Well, Jenna and Eric, President Trump defended escalating that trade war you were just mentioning as good economic policy. Trump said a deal with China was, get this, 95% done when White House officials were informed in China that the deal was off. Now, that's when Trump decided to move forward with new tariffs.
We are taking in tens of billions of dollars. We've never done that before with China. We've never done that before with anybody, frankly.
Financial markets threatened going over the edge Monday after China retaliated for the U.S. raising tariffs on $200 billion worth of Chinese goods. Trump tweeted, "I say openly to President Xi and all my many friends in China that China will be hurt very badly if you don't make a deal because companies will be forced to leave China for other countries. Too expensive to buy in China. You had a great deal, almost completed, and you backed out." Adding there will be nobody left in China to do business with. Very bad for China, very good for USA.
We don't think the Chinese have come far enough. How long does it take? I don't know. It could be a couple of months, thereabouts.
Kudlow says negotiations are ongoing as his boss calls for higher tariffs on about $300 billion more in Chinese imports. Trump's targeting China's unfair trade practices and wants them to stop stealing American intellectual property and technology.
We've been taken advantage of on all of our trade deals, practically. This is a very positive step. I love the position we're in. There can be some retaliation, but it can't be very, very substantial by comparison.
President Trump confirmed that he will meet with Chinese President Xi and Russian President Vladimir Putin at the G20 summit in Japan next month. Jenna, Eric, no doubt trade will be at the top of their agenda.
Yeah, trade and these tariffs as well. And speaking of the tariffs, Ben, any idea how Americans will feel the pinch from these tariffs?
Yeah, Eric, White House economic advisor Larry Kudlow says both China's economy and U.S. consumers will suffer from these tariffs. We could see increased prices on items like TVs, cars, batteries, beauty products, and even coffee. And odds are importers won't absorb the entire cost, but push it onto consumers like you and me.
Ben Kennedy live at the White House for us tonight. Thank you very much. Well, Derek Scissors is a resident scholar at the American Enterprise Institute, where he focuses on U.S.-China economic relations, trade barriers, and international finance. Derek, thank you very much for joining us. Now, first up.
And Derek Scissors is a resident scholar at the American Enterprise Institute, where he focuses on U.S.-China economic relations, trade barriers, and international finance. Derek, thank you for joining us.
Yes, thanks very much. And first off, we want to get started with the news of the day, where the retaliatory tariffs in China are concerned. They were put in place today. The question is, were they expected?
They should have been expected. There was no way the Chinese were going to do nothing after the U.S. added tariffs early Friday morning, the response is actually moderate. It doesn't cover very much ground. It covers almost no new ground. It's the low end of what we would have expected China to do. They will no doubt threaten more if the talks continue to drag on or if they collapse.
Derek, are we going to see more tariffs from the Chinese, do you think?
Well, not initially. They're going to wait to see what the U.S. does with this supposedly pending Federal Register notice about expanding the tariffs. Right now, the U.S. has a 25% tariff on $250 billion worth of Chinese goods. The president has repeatedly threatened to put a 25% tariff on the rest, which is over $300 billion. And if we do that, if the U.S. takes a step in that direction, there's a public notice period, but the Chinese will retaliate against that step as well. We haven't done that yet today. So the Chinese are holding some retaliation in reserve.
Yeah, and you're really foreboding the next question we were going to ask, which is, will President Trump up the ante on this sort of tit-for-tat deal and issue more tariffs?
Well, that's what they've said is going to happen. There's no date yet for the next round of talks in Beijing. It's very hard to imagine the next round of talks will lead to a conclusion of the deal. So the president has a difficult choice here, because that next round of tariffs is a big escalation. Now, it can be put 60 or 90 days off, so you can threaten it without imposing the tariffs. I suspect that's what he's going to do, but as we know, the stock market is very weak today. Without more talks scheduled, that's a lot of stick and very little carrot.
Yeah, Derek, what do you make of the president's handling of the situation?
Well, I think he had to, once we got to the point where we thought we had a deal, we were 90% of a deal with China, and then they walked back the deal. There was either a mistake or a miscommunication on their part. The president pretty much had to do what he's done since then. I never liked tariffs as the tool. I wanted to target large Chinese state-owned enterprises. I think they represent what's wrong with the Chinese economic system. But once we went down the tariff road, when the Chinese reneged on some of their promises, as we saw it, the president since then has been handling it the only way he could.
Now, Derek, we know the president is fond of tweeting. So what about this latest tweet where the president is warning China not to wait until 2020? Is that a good idea? And how do you think China is going to react to that?
Well, I interpret that the following way. None of this trouble, which I think we needed to have in U.S.-China economic relations, occurred when President Obama was in office. And of course, who was vice president at the time? Joe Biden, who is now leading the Democratic polls. If you're the Chinese, the ideal outcome is to go back to 2016 or 2015 when they didn't face all this antagonism from the U.S. And again, I think that antagonism is deserved. So the president is trying to drive home the point that we're not going to go back to 2015, 2016. Don't try to wait me out. I think he should do that. I'm not sure it will work. We're only a year and a half away now from the next election. The Chinese might decide we'll take the pain and see who we get, if we can get a new president who has a different approach, because President Obama, President Bush, President Clinton didn't do the things President Trump is now doing.
Now, Derek, what would it take for just a total restart here?
I think a restart involves President Trump talking to General Secretary Xi. I don't like that way of negotiating. I don't like personal negotiations that affect the entire U.S. economy. It's a very complicated issue. But if you want a restart to clear away the problems we've had in these talks, it probably starts with them. Remember, this round of talks started with the two of them meeting in Argentina in early December. They probably have to meet again to try to figure out how the wires got crossed.
A situation we're all sure to watch very closely for a long time to come. Derek Scissors with AEI. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Growing concern over Iran and the Middle East forced Secretary of State Mike Pompeo to change his travel plans today. Instead of going to Moscow, he headed to Brussels to talk with European leaders, nervous about Iran pulling out of its nuclear agreement.
Mr. Pompeo, how was the meeting on Iran?
Thank you all.
U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo left Monday's meeting without any indication of how it went. The talks included the foreign ministers of Britain, France, Germany, and EU's foreign policy chief, all trying to figure out how to re-engage Iran in the nuclear deal.
That for us remains a key pillar of security in our region, and it has been and continues to be for us a key element of non-proliferation.
While it may be key, last week that pact began to unravel when Iran partially bowed out, saying the U.S. violated the deal when it pulled out a year ago and then imposed debilitating sanctions. The regime gave a 60-day deadline to come up with a new agreement, or it could take further action. Former Secretary of Defense Robert Gates weighed in on Sunday's Face the Nation.
The next step ought to be to say, we need to go back and fix this agreement, which is actually what this administration is trying to do but has not been successful, because they're going to have to offer some incentives for the Iranians.
Meanwhile, Monday, 2 Saudi oil tankers heading to pick up oil to take to the United States were sabotaged off the coast of the United Arab Emirates. The U.S. warned it could be the work of Iran or its proxies. Just last week, the U.S. moved an aircraft carrier and B-52 bombers to the Persian Gulf to better deal with what were called unspecified threats from Iran. It's a delicate balancing act for the Trump administration that is also deadlocked in nuclear talks with North Korea. Twice last week, Pyongyang launched missiles as part of what it called routine tests.
I think the objective of Iran not having nuclear weapons and not having the ballistic missiles to attack their neighbors in the Middle East and us, the objective of North Korea denuclearizing and not being able to threaten its neighbors, I think those are laudable objectives. The problem is we've got 25 or 30 years experience with both of these regimes showing that that maximalist objective is probably not attainable.
And that's what world leaders are working on, trying to come up with a plan and outcomes that are attainable. This is the third time in the last week Pompeo has interrupted his schedule to deal with Iran. However, he is still expected to meet on Tuesday in Sochi with Russian President Vladimir Putin and the foreign minister there. It will be Pompeo's first visit to Russia as Secretary of State.
Well, President Trump is slamming Democratic Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib for comments she made related to the Holocaust. In a tweet today, the president said the Congresswoman, quote, obviously has tremendous hatred of Israel and the Jewish people, adding, can you imagine what would happen if I ever said what she said? Congresswoman Tlaib, who is Muslim, used the words, a calming feeling, in the context of the Holocaust during a radio podcast. The Congresswoman responded to the backlash in a tweet Sunday, writing that, quote, policing my words will not work, and that I will never allow you to take my words out of context.
Thousands of pro-life supporters converged on Philadelphia for a major rally Friday after a Pennsylvania state lawmaker ignited a firestorm.
We are not going to continue to be bullied as pro-lifers. I am sick of this idea that just because we are Christians, we cannot stand up and defend ourselves, that we cannot stand up and defend our unborn brothers and sisters.
National pro-life leaders gathered supporters to rally around life. The call to action was a direct response to a state rep who posted a video of himself harassing a woman protesting abortion outside of a Planned Parenthood clinic.
Well, Marilyn Musgrave is a former congresswoman from Colorado, and she joins us now. And she's now with the Susan B. Anthony list. Marilyn, thanks so much for being here.
Glad to be here.
What do you make of the state of abortion in our culture today? You see a rally like this in Pennsylvania. You see states like Georgia passing heartbeat bills. What are your thoughts?
Well, first of all, being at that rally was an incredible experience. There were a sea of people there, pro-life individuals. We were right in front of the clinic where Brian Sims harassed the older lady, and the teenage girls and the clinic escorts were right there. So it was a very intense rally, but very peaceful and very loving. But when you look at what's happening around the country, Virginia and New York, the extremism, the brazen celebration of abortion, the incredible remarks of a governor who also happens to be a pediatrician talking about what happens if a baby survives a failed abortion. I mean, people didn't really know, I believe, that a lot of people didn't know what Roe v. Wade really did in this country. And these things are showing the extremism, the abortion for any reason at any time during the pregnancy. And state legislators are responding.
Yes, it's as much about learning your history as everything else, really, when you think about it.
When, you know, 1973 was a long time ago. Some people have no idea. And when you look at the state legislatures, I've been a state legislator, and, you know, they respond. Over 250 pro-life laws have been introduced in the last year.
When you talk about legislation, Georgia just passed the heartbeat bill. Now, you know, other states are trying to do the same thing. How effective do you think this legislation will be?
I'm not sure how effective it will be, but what I do know is pain-capable, banning late-term abortion after the 5th month of pregnancy, the heartbeat bill saying that if a baby survives a failed abortion, it has to have the medical care that any other preemie would get. These laws are a response, again, to the extremism, and state legislatures all over the country are responding to this. The courts are in the driver's seat. We'll see which laws make it. The court gets to decide what will be before them, when it will be before them, but I do know there's an incredible response for life around the country.
States are making this push. They're doing a number of other things too, Marilyn. Talk about what states and lawmakers are doing to bring this case, this issue of abortion and Roe v. Wade before the Supreme Court.
Well, they're responding in a way where they're talking about every bill that exposes the extremism of the pro-abortion side. That rally in Philadelphia showed how angry the other side can be and how intimidating they can be. And so when we have legislators championing heartbeat, they're really pushing for more and more protection for the unborn child. When we have bills banning infanticide, it's saying, do you realize even if a baby survives an abortion, that some people don't even think they deserve medical care then? So again, it's looking towards the courts. They will decide. The Supreme Court will decide what and when they'll hear it. But the states are pushing all the while to get these cases going through.
Well, now, pro-choice activists will tell you that, you know, health care is important and that abortion is a part of health care. You say what to that?
Well, first of all, I say abortion is not health care. And furthermore, it's not family planning. So we've been told a couple of lies. We have great statistics to show that there are medical providers around the country, clinics and other things that provide comprehensive health care to women that don't do abortions. But when you talk about abortion providers, the abortion giant Planned Parenthood, there's never been a mammogram performed in a Planned Parenthood facility ever. They do not provide comprehensive health care for women. Their business is abortion. So we have great alternatives for women. You look at Planned Parenthood, they oppose health and safety regulations, all sorts of things that are really pro-women health care. So there are other choices out there, and I hope women will make those choices.
You mentioned safety. A lot of pro-choice folks also will say if you get rid of abortion, you'll see an increase in back alley abortions. What do you say to that argument?
Well, that's a very old argument, and I guess what we should be saying right now, wait a minute, you're so extreme. You think even after a baby is born, they can still be killed. And so I look at that, and I think it's becoming more and more apparent in this country with science on our side that people are being really informed about what abortion is all about. When I was in high school, girls were told it's a blob of tissue. We all know it isn't a blob of tissue anymore. We know that babies in the womb have surgery now. They're given anesthetic because the outcome is better. There's evidence out there to show that children feel pain in the womb. That's why banning abortion after the 5th month is gaining ground in the states around the country. Science is on our side. Young people are becoming more and more pro-life, and women in greater numbers support these pro-life actions than men. So I think it's a new day for the pro-life movement.
Marilyn Musgrave with the Susan B. Anthony List. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good to be here. Thank you.
Well, coming up, the Equality Act may be anything but. How Democrats' changes could impinge on religious freedom. Religious freedom advocates are sounding an alarm on the new Equality Act. The Democrats introduced this version, saying it would be it would ban discrimination based on sexual orientation.
But as CBN's Abigail Robertson explains, opponents say the bill is really anything but equal.
Males identifying as females using the women's locker room. Faith-based adoption and foster agencies required to place children with same-sex couples, and florists forced to fill orders for same-sex weddings. Critics tell me these are just a few of the potential results if the Equality Act becomes law.
Every American should be treated with dignity and respect, but our laws need to protect the constitutionally guaranteed rights that we have.
Greg Baylor and the Alliance Defending Freedom handled numerous religious liberty cases in states where laws like the Equality Act already exist.
Now, under the Equality Act, we will have a nationwide law, so we will see a proliferation of instances where Christians and others are being coerced to violate their beliefs in order to comply with such a law.
While introducing the bill, Democrat lawmakers talked about making the protection of same-sex individuals a priority over other constitutional freedoms.
We cannot allow claims of religious freedom to be used to discriminate against an LGBT individual.
It makes a difference when any level of government or any corporation says that this sort of discriminatory behavior and action is wrong. It makes a difference. And it provides those of us in our community, the LGBTQ community, with the tools that we need to fight back.
Baylor maintains the bill does much more than that.
One of the interesting things about the Equality Act, compared to the last version, is that it focuses in, it adds more to punish faith-based adoption and foster providers.
In requiring faith-based adoption agencies to place children with same-sex couples, sponsors argue the bill would increase the number of homes available to foster children. Baylor points out that forces these agencies to go against their religious beliefs.
Why is it necessary for the government to force faith-based adoption providers, like the New Hope Center that we represent in New York, to violate their convictions?
He also believes if this becomes law, we will see religious freedom cases popping up all over the country.
This is a frontal assault on religious liberty that we have not seen in the history of our nation. Not only does it contain no exemptions for religious organizations, for religious individuals, like many of these laws in the past have done, it actually strips us of our constitutionally protected rights.
The bill is expected to pass the Democrat-controlled House and even has a few Republican supporters. But as of now, the Senate is not expected to bring it to the floor this session. Reporting from Capitol Hill, Abigail Robertson, CBN News.
Thanks, Abigail. And for more on the Equality Act and what it could mean for Christians, tune in tomorrow to the 700 Club for an important interview with Matt Staver, attorney and founder of the Liberty Counsel.
And when we come back, persecution against Christians is on the rise. How the vice president's message to students is preparing a new generation. That's coming up next.
During his commencement address this weekend, Vice President Pence told 8,000 graduates at Liberty University to take up a banner of love. Amber Strong has the story.
It was a message for Christians young and young at heart. The oldest graduate, 87, the youngest, 17.
I say, not so much as your vice president, but as a brother in Christ. If what you've seen and heard and learned in this place has also taken hold in your hearts, go from here and live it out.
Pence telling the students they picked a great time to graduate.
After 2 years of the leadership of President Donald Trump, jobs are coming back and America is back. You are entering a growing American economy.
The vice president also using the platform to point to attacks on people of faith around the globe.
We've seen unspeakable attacks on people of faith, on Jewish synagogues in Pennsylvania and California, on mosques in New Zealand, Christian churches in Sri Lanka, and on 3 historically black churches in Louisiana. These attacks on people of faith must stop.
And issuing this warning to Americans.
As you go about your daily life, just be ready. Because you're going to be asked not just to tolerate things that violate your faith, you're going to be asked to endorse them. You're going to be asked to bow down to the idols of the popular culture. So you need to prepare your minds for action, men and women. You need to show that we can love God and love our neighbor at the same time.
This is the second time Vice President Pence has delivered a speech to the university. Liberty prides itself on its diversity of speakers. Past speakers include Presidents Trump, Carter, and Senator Bernie Sanders. Amber Strong, CBN News in Washington.
All right, Amber, thanks, and congratulations to all the graduates there.
A lot of students. I didn't realize that many.
A lot, really. That'll do it for us tonight on Faith Nation.
Have a great evening.